What happens when the fairy tale shatters? Rosalind Vance was living a dream, married to billionaire titan Damian Blackwood, pregnant with their first child, residing in a sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But as she lay in a hospital bed, her life and the life of her unborn baby hanging by a thread after a sudden terrifying collapse, her dream became a nightmare. The one person she needed, her devoted husband, was unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail. His private jet wasn't en route to his supposed business meeting in Tokyo. It was parked on a sun-drenched tarmac in the Caribbean. And Damian Blackwood was not alone. The story you are about to hear is a chilling tale of betrayal, greed, and a mother's ferocious will to survive. The crystal chandeliers of the Blackwood penthouse on Park Avenue seemed to weep, their light fracturing into 1,000 lonely shards across the polished marble floors. Just hours ago, this space had been prepped for joy. Baby blue and silver balloons were meant to bob against the 20-foot ceilings. A 5-tier cake from a celebrity baker was scheduled for delivery. It was the day of Rosalind Vance's baby shower, an event orchestrated to be the talk of New York's elite. Rosalind, at 8 months pregnant, had felt like the queen of this gilded world. She'd walked through the grand living room that morning, a hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, a soft smile on her lips. She traced the spine of a leather-bound book on Damian's mahogany desk, his scent a crisp, expensive mix of sandalwood and ambition lingering in the air. He'd called her that morning, his voice a smooth baritone crackling slightly over the satellite phone. "I'm so sorry I'm missing this, my love," Damian Blackwood had said. "This Tokyo deal is a monster. Close it and I'm on the first flight home to you and our little man." Rosalind believed him. Why wouldn't she? For 3 years, Damian had been her everything. He'd swept her off her feet, a bright, unassuming art historian, and brought her into a world of unimaginable luxury and power. The Blackwood name was practically royalty in the world of finance and real estate. And he had chosen her. He'd always made her feel chosen, cherished. The first pang of pain had been sharp, sudden, and terrifying. She'd dismissed it as a Braxton Hicks contraction, something her doctor had prepared her for. She was reaching for a glass of water when the second wave hit, a brutal, wrenching cramp that stole her breath and sent a spray of icy fear through her veins. She crumpled to the floor, the plush Aubusson carpet doing little to cushion her fall. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her cell phone lying just out of reach on a glass coffee table. It was her brother Nathaniel "Nate" Hayes who found her. An architect with a thriving but modest firm, Nate was the antithesis of the Blackwood world. He was grounded, fiercely protective, and had always been slightly wary of the speed with which his sister had been absorbed into Damian's universe. He'd arrived an hour early for the shower, a ridiculously oversized teddy bear under his arm, only to be met with an eerie silence. Using the emergency key Rosalind had given him, he'd let himself in, his cheerful, "Rosie, I'm here," dying in his throat at the sight of her unconscious on the floor. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. The 911 call was a blur of choked words. The paramedics were a whirlwind of calm, professional urgency. As they loaded his sister onto a gurney, her face as pale as porcelain, Nate's hand instinctively went to his pocket for his phone. He had to call Damian. The first call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Damian Blackwood. I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message." The voice was polished, confident, and utterly detached from the unfolding horror. Nate tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. He called Damian's personal assistant, a perpetually flustered woman named Bethany. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Blackwood is in flight to Tokyo. All communications are down as per standard procedure. He's not to be disturbed." "This is a medical emergency," Nate yelled into the phone, his voice echoing in the now cavernous, silent penthouse. "His wife has collapsed. She's pregnant. They're taking her to Lenox Hill Hospital right now." I will do what I can," Bethany stammered. "I will try to get a message to the cockpit crew via satellite relay, but I can't promise anything." At the hospital, the news was a relentless barrage of clinical, terrifying terms. severe placental abruption, maternal hemorrhaging, fetal distress. Emergency cesarean section is our only option. Nate stood alone in the sterile waiting room, the giant teddy bear now slumped in a chair beside him, a pathetic, fluffy monument to a day that had gone horribly wrong. He was Rosalind's emergency contact, her next of kin on the forms, a role that should have been Damien's. He fielded calls from bewildered friends and family, canceling the shower with a leaden voice. Hours bled into one another. He paced, he prayed, he called Damien's phone another 20 times. Voicemail. Always voicemail. Frustration curdled into a dark, ugly suspicion. Damien ran a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was a man who could move markets with a single phone call. The idea that he was completely unreachable felt wrong. It felt like a lie, driven by a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Nate made another call. This one wasn't to a friend or family member. It was to an old college acquaintance, a man who now worked in a niche field tracking private aviation for high-net-worth clients. "It's a weird request. I know, Mark," Nate said, his voice low. "But can you check the tail number on Damien Blackwood's Gulfstream G650? It's N91DB. He's supposed to be flying to Tokyo, but I need to be sure." There was a pause, the sound of furious typing. "Nate," Mark said a minute later, his voice strange. "That's not right." "What's not right?" Nate asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The flight plan for N91DB wasn't filed for Tokyo," Mark said slowly. "It was filed for a private airstrip in the Caribbean. The flight departed Teterboro 4 hours ago." Nate felt the blood drain from his face. "The Caribbean? Where in the Caribbean?" Another few seconds of typing. "According to the transponder data, the jet landed 30 minutes ago, on the island of St. Barthélemy, St. Bart's." The name hit Nate like a physical blow. St. Bart's, the playground of the rich and famous, an island known for sun sand and secrecy. It was not a place one went for a monster business deal. In that moment, as a doctor walked toward him with a grave expression, Nate knew. He knew with a sickening certainty that while his sister was fighting for her life and the life of their child in a cold New York hospital room, her billionaire husband was somewhere warm, sunny, and very, very far from where he was supposed to be. And he was not alone. The carefully constructed facade of Rosalind's perfect life had just been shattered, and the truth was about to be more devastating than he could ever imagine. The world for Rosalind and her baby had shrunk to the rhythmic beep and hiss of machines in the intensive care unit. After a grueling 5-hour surgery, she was stable but weak, drifting in a morphine-induced haze. Her son, delivered at just 32 weeks, had been whisked away to the NICU. He was tiny, fragile, and fighting for every breath. Nate had seen him for a fleeting moment through the glass of an incubator, a mess of wires and tubes attached to a perfect miniature human being. He'd been named Arthur, a name Rosalind and Damien had chosen together in happier times. A strong, classic name. Kingly. Now it just felt achingly vulnerable. Nate sat by Rosalind's bedside, her hand cool and limp in his. The sight of her so diminished and pale against the stark white sheets ignited a cold, hard fury in his chest. St. Bart's. The name echoed in his mind, a taunt. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't wait. Leaving a message with the head nurse to call him the second she stirred, he left the hospital and went to a place he never thought he'd need, the Midtown office of Frank Costello, private investigator. Costello was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and left out in the rain. A former NYPD detective, he operated out of a cramped, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and cynicism. He listened to Nate's story without interruption, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Let me get this straight," Costello said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Wife has a near-fatal emergency. Billionaire husband is supposed to be in Tokyo, but his jet is in St. Bart's. You want me to find out what he's doing there and who he's with?" "Yes," Nate said, his voice tight. "I want proof. I want pictures. I want to know everything. This kind of work isn't cheap, kid, especially on short notice and offshore." "I don't care about the cost," Nate replied, pulling out his checkbook. "My sister's life has been turned upside down. She deserves the truth." Costello looked at the younger man's determined face, then nodded slowly. "I have a contact on the island. A good photographer. Paparazzi, but discreet when the money's right. I'll make the call." As Costello worked his grim magic, Nate was left to drown in memories. He remembered Rosalind's wedding day, the way she'd looked at Damien, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. Damien had been charming, attentive, a perfect gentleman. He'd even pulled Nate aside during the reception. "I know she's your little sister," Damien had said, clapping a hand on Nate's shoulder. "I want you to know I'll spend my life making her happy. I'll protect her from everything." Protect her. The words were now a bitter poison in Nate's memory. 24 hours later, Costello's promised email arrived. The subject line was Stark Blackwood. Nate's hand trembled as he clicked it open. The attachment contained a series of high-resolution photographs. The quality was exceptional, the content soul-crushing. There was Damien Blackwood not in a suit but in crisp white linen trousers and a light blue shirt unbuttoned to reveal a tan chest. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a picture of carefree relaxation. He was seated at an outdoor table at a chic, exclusive beach club. The turquoise water of the Caribbean sparkled behind him. And across the table from him, her hand resting intimately on his, was a woman. She was stunning in a way that was both intimidating and impossibly glamorous. High cheekbones, a cascade of raven black hair, eyes hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. She wore a silk sundress that looked like it cost more than Nate's car. In one photo, she leaned across the table and kissed Damien, a long, languid kiss that was anything but secret. Another photo showed them walking along a private beach, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. Costello had included a brief report. Subject: Damien Blackwood. Location: Eden Rock, St. Bart's. Companion: Genevieve Dubois, French national. Former runway model, now a purported art consultant and socialite, well known in European circles. They checked into a private villa 2 days ago. Booked for the week. Genevieve Dubois. Nate typed the name into a search engine. The results were a curated gallery of a jet-set life photos from the Cannes Film Festival, the Monaco Grand Prix, a charity gala in London. In many of them, she was on the arm of a powerful man. But the most recent articles mentioned her connection to the art world, brokering multi-million-dollar deals for anonymous collectors. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a brightly lit, full-color reality. Damien hadn't just lied about a business trip. He had constructed an elaborate deception to steal away for a romantic tryst with his mistress while his wife, carrying his child, was left alone in New York. A call from the hospital interrupted his dark thoughts. It was the nurse. "Mr. Hayes, your sister is awake. She's asking for you." Nate rushed back to Lenox Hill, the sickening photos burning a hole in his phone's memory. He found Rosalind sitting up slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Nate," she whispered, her voice raspy. Is our baby okay?" Nate took her hand, forcing a gentle smile that felt like a mask. "He's a fighter, Rosie. A real little fighter. He's in the NICU, but he's stable. The doctors are optimistic." Relief washed over her face, followed immediately by another question. "Damien, have you reached him? Does he know he must be worried sick?" Nate's heart broke. The innocence, the unwavering faith in her husband was still there. He couldn't tell her. Not now. Not when she was this fragile. The connection's been bad. He lied, the words tasting like ash. His assistant said they're having trouble with the satellite comms on the jet. "I'm sure he'll call the second he lands." Rosalind nodded, accepting the lie, her brow furrowed with worry for her husband, not for herself. Poor Damien. He's going to feel so guilty for not being here. You have to tell him it's not his fault. It just happened. Nate could only nod, a knot of rage and grief tightening in his gut. He knew with dreadful certainty that Damien Blackwood felt no guilt at all. As Rosalind closed her eyes, exhausted, Nate looked out the hospital window at the cold, gray city. He thought of the sun-drenched beach, the laughing man, and the beautiful woman by his side. The fight for Rosalind and Arthur's health was in the hands of the doctors. But the fight against Damien Blackwood had just begun, and Nate would be its first soldier. The arrival of Victoria Blackwood was not an entrance. It was an occupation. She swept into the sterile quiet of the hospital's private wing like an Arctic front trailed by two stern-looking men in dark suits who were clearly not doctors. Victoria Damien's mother was a woman forged from old money and unyielding will. Her silver hair was coiled into an impeccable chignon, her couture suit was armor, and her eyes, the same piercing gray as her son's, held no warmth, only appraisal. She bypassed the nurse's station as if it were invisible, her heels clicking in imperious rhythm on the polished floor. She found Nate sitting vigil outside Rosalind's room. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sympathy. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. "I need an update, the exact situation." Nate stood his own grief momentarily eclipsed by a wave of dislike for this woman. He had only met her a handful of times, and each encounter had left him feeling like a specimen under a microscope. "Rosalind is stable, but she lost a lot of blood. The baby Arthur is in the NICU. He's premature, but they're hopeful," he said, keeping his voice level. Victoria's gaze flickered with something not concern but calculation. "And Damien, have you made contact?" "His phone goes to voicemail," Nate said, watching her carefully. "His office said he was in flight to Tokyo and unreachable." Victoria's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "An unfortunate complication. I've taken the liberty of dispatching a message through more effective channels. He is being recalled. The Tokyo deal can be postponed." She made it sound like she was recalling a faulty appliance, not summoning a son to his wife's and child's side. "I need to see Rosalind," she announced, moving toward the door. "She's sleeping," Nate said, instinctively stepping to block her path. "The doctor said she needs absolute rest." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I am her mother-in-law. I am the grandmother of that child in the NICU. I will not be told when I can and cannot see my family." The sheer audacity of it, the ownership in her tone, made Nate's blood run cold. Before he could argue further, a doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Sharma, intervened. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said firmly, "your daughter-in-law is my patient, and she is in a very delicate state, both physically and emotionally. Rest is paramount. No visitors outside of her brother for now. That is my final word." Victoria looked at Dr. Sharma as if she were an insect, but the doctor held her ground. Thwarted, the matriarch turned her attention back to Nate, gesturing for him to follow her to a private waiting area down the hall. "This is a disaster," she said once they were alone, her voice a low, intense hiss. "The press will get wind of this. A Blackwood heir born under emergency circumstances. The rumors will fly. We need to control the narrative." Nate stared at her, aghast. "Control the narrative? Victoria, Rosalind almost died. Your grandson is fighting for his life in an incubator." "Do not be naive, Nathaniel," she snapped. "Every family has its crises. The difference is how the Blackwoods handle them. We do not air our laundry in public. We present a united front. When Damien returns, the official story will be that he was in a top-secret negotiation and returned the moment he was notified." "Understood." The lie was so blatant, so self-serving, it took Nate's breath away. He thought of the pictures of Damien and Genevieve Dubois laughing in the sunshine. "And where is he returning from?" Nate asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "This top-secret negotiation, was it in St. Bart's?" The direct hit landed. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed Victoria's face before the mask of icy control slammed back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice even colder than before. "I do," Nate shot back, his control finally snapping. "I have photos, Victoria, of him, with a woman named Genevieve Dubois. They were at Eden Rock while my sister was bleeding on her penthouse floor." Victoria was silent for a long moment. She walked to the window, looking down at the traffic on the street below. When she turned back, her expression was one of pragmatic ruthlessness. "Men like my son have appetites," she said, as if explaining a simple biological fact. "Genevieve is a dalliance, a meaningless distraction. It's unfortunate that its timing coincided with this medical issue." "A medical issue?" Nate was incredulous. "You're defending him." "I am protecting my family, and my family's legacy," she corrected him. "Rosalind is a Blackwood now. She has a duty. This changes nothing." She paused, her gaze turning sharp as steel. "You should advise her to remember that. And you should also advise her to remember the terms of the agreement she signed before the wedding." "The prenup," Nate said flatly. "Precisely," Victoria confirmed. "Our lawyers are the best in the world. It is, shall we say, ironclad. It stipulates in no uncertain terms that in the event of a dissolution of the marriage, she is entitled to a one-time payment. Generous by any normal standard, but a pittance in our world. She waives all claims to Blackwood assets, properties, and holdings. And more importantly, any hint of infidelity, proven or otherwise, if made public, is considered a breach of a confidentiality clause, rendering the entire agreement null and void. She would walk away with nothing." Nate felt sick. It was a trap, a perfectly legal, brilliantly cruel trap. They had bought his sister, and the price of her freedom was her silence and her poverty. So she's supposed to just accept this, welcome him back with open arms while he has a mistress in the Caribbean. She will do what is necessary to secure her future and the future of her child, Victoria stated. The Blackwood name provides a life of privilege and protection. Arthur is a Blackwood. He will be raised as one. Rosalind is his mother. She will be well cared for as long as she is sensible. The threat was unmistakable. Play along or be cast out and left with nothing, not even the resources to fight for her own son. The Blackwood Wall wasn't just about controlling the press. It was about controlling people. It was a fortress of money, power, and lawyers, and they had just surrounded his sister. As Victoria turned to leave, her composure absolute, she delivered one final chilling remark. "For what it's worth, Nathaniel," she said, pausing at the door. "I did warn Damien that this particular girl, Genevieve, was more trouble than she was worth. He can be headstrong." She knew. The final piece clicked into place. Victoria had known about the affair all along. She hadn't cared about the betrayal, only about its potential to become a public relations problem. Nate was left alone in the silent room, the true nature of the family his sister had married into laid bare. They weren't just dysfunctional, they were predatory. And Rosalind, waking up to a world of pain and fear, had no idea she was sleeping in the lion's den. The haze of medication lifted slowly, peeling back layers of pain to reveal a stark new reality. Rosalind's first lucid thoughts were of her baby, Arthur. Nate had been her rock, his constant presence a comfort, his reassurances about the baby a lifeline. But she needed to see for herself. Against the doctor's initial advice, she insisted. Bundled into a wheelchair, Nate pushing her, they made the solemn journey to the neonatal intensive care unit. The scene inside was a surreal landscape of quiet urgency. The soft chime of monitors, the low hum of ventilators, the hushed voices of nurses. And there, in a clear plastic box, was Arthur. He was so much smaller than she had ever imagined. His skin was translucent, a web of tiny blue veins visible beneath. A feeding tube was taped to his cheek, and monitors tracked every precious breath and heartbeat. Rosalind pressed her hand against the incubator, tears streaming down her face. He was so perfect, so fragile. A wave of love so fierce and primal it stole her breath, washed over her. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter," Nate said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Just like his mom." The sight of her son, so vulnerable and yet so determined to live, ignited something in Rosalind. The weakness and confusion began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, sharp-edged resolve. She was a mother. his protector. Back in her room, the second part of her new reality had to be faced. "Damien," she said, her voice stronger now. "Tell me the truth, Nate. No more lies about bad connections. Where is he?" Nate hesitated, his expression pained. He had hoped to shield her for longer, but he saw the new strength in her eyes. She deserved the truth. He sat down, took a deep breath, and told her everything. He told her about the jet to St. Bart's. He told her about Frank Costello, the private investigator. And then, his voice gentle, he showed her the photos on his phone. Rosalind stared at the images, her face a mask of disbelief. The laughing man on the screen was her husband, but it was also a stranger. The casual intimacy with the beautiful raven-haired woman was a physical blow. Each photo was a dagger methodically dismantling the entire foundation of her marriage. The loving phone calls, the promises, the Tokyo deal. It was all a lie. A carefully crafted illusion to cover a sordid, sun-drenched escape. She didn't cry. The tears she'd shed for her son had been born of love and fear. This new emotion was something colder, harder. It was a profound, hollow ache of betrayal that quickly began to burn. "Genevieve Dubois," she said, the name tasting like poison. She handed the phone back to Nate, her hand perfectly steady. "I see." Then Nate delivered the final, crushing blow. He told her about Victoria's visit, about the threats, the demands for silence, and the ironclad prenup designed to leave her penniless and powerless if she dared to expose the truth. "She wants me to be sensible," Rosalind repeated, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "She wants me to welcome him home, play the role of the forgiving wife, and raise my son in this family of vipers. All to protect the Blackwood name." She looked from Nate to the window, her gaze distant. For 3 years she had lived inside the gilded cage, believing it was a palace. She had willingly clipped her own wings, setting aside her career, her ambitions to be Mrs. Damien Blackwood. She had seen Victoria's coldness and Damien's ruthlessness in business as mere quirks of their powerful world, not as the fundamental truths of their character. Now she saw it all. The woman who had crumpled to the penthouse floor was gone. The naive art historian was a ghost. In her place, a mother was forged in the crucible of betrayal and fear. "They think I'm weak," Rosalind said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "They think they've bought me. They think I'll roll over to protect a lifestyle I now realize is worthless. They've made a mistake. A very big mistake." She turned to Nate, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "They threatened to leave me with nothing. Fine. Let them try. But they will not take my son. They will not take my dignity. And they will not get away with this." "What are you going to do?" Nate asked, a sense of awe mixing with his concern. "First," she said, her mind working with startling clarity, "I need a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I need the sharpest, most ruthless divorce attorney in New York City. Someone who isn't afraid of the Blackwood name. Someone who eats people like Victoria for breakfast." She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Second, tell your investigator, Mr. Costello, to keep digging. I don't want to know just about the affair anymore. I want to know everything. About Genevieve Dubois. About Damien's finances. About every business trip he's taken for the past year. They want to play dirty. We'll show them what dirty really is." "Rosie, are you sure?" Nate asked, worried about the toll this would take on her. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, her gaze drifting back towards the direction of the NICU. "I'm not fighting for a settlement anymore, Nate. I'm fighting for my son. I'm fighting for me." That afternoon, Nate made a call. Evelyn Reed was a legend in Manhattan's legal circles. A shark in a Chanel suit, she specialized in taking down powerful men. Her initial response to taking on the Blackwoods was cautious. They were a formidable foe. But then Nate put her on the phone with Rosalind. For 20 minutes, Evelyn listened as Rosalind from her hospital bed laid out the situation with chilling precision and icy determination. She spoke not as a victim, but as a queen whose kingdom had been stolen. When the call was over, Evelyn Reed's voice had a new tone of respect, even excitement. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "tell your sister not to sign anything, not to speak to anyone from the Blackwood family. Tell her to focus on getting well and taking care of her son. I'll handle the rest. This is going to be very, very interesting." The battle lines had been drawn. The Blackwoods, with their wall of money and power, believed they were untouchable, but they had underestimated their opponent. They had not counted on the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. While Rosalind focused on her recovery, spending every possible moment by Arthur's incubator, a different kind of war was being waged. Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello formed an unlikely but formidable team. Evelyn, with her legal acumen and network of forensic accountants, attacked the Blackwood empire from the front. Costello, with his shadowy contacts and back-alley methods, tunneled in from below. Costello's investigation into Genevieve Dubois hit a wall at first. Her public persona was impeccable, her digital footprint curated to perfection. She was an enigma wrapped in couture. But Costello had learned long ago that everyone has a past. He started digging not into Genevieve, but into Damien's finances following the money. The business trips were the key. Tokyo, Zurich, Dubai, Cayman Islands. For each trip, there were massive multi-million-dollar wire transfers from a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries, but the receiving accounts weren't corporate partners. They were shell corporations with innocuous names like Aegean Holdings and Alpine Ventures, registered in impenetrable offshore jurisdictions. This is where Evelyn Reed's team took over. Her forensic accountants, modern-day digital bloodhounds, began to untangle the web. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, but on a breathtaking scale. Damien Blackwood was systematically draining money from his own family's company. "He's not just cheating on his wife," Evelyn explained to Nate during a tense meeting in her office. "He's cheating on his entire family. He's building a nest egg, a massive one. We're talking upwards of $100 million that we can trace so far." The twist came when they finally cracked the ownership of one of the shell corporations. It wasn't registered to Damien. The sole director and beneficiary of Aegean Holdings was listed as one Genevieve Dubois. The picture snapped into terrifying focus. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. Genevieve wasn't a dalliance, or a distraction, as Victoria had so dismissively called her. She was Damien's business partner in the systematic looting of his own company. The art consultant persona was the perfect cover explaining her international travel and access to the world of high finance. "She's not his mistress," Rosalind said from her hospital room when Nate updated her. She had been discharged but refused to go home to the penthouse, instead taking a suite near the hospital to be close to Arthur. "She's his accomplice." The revelation changed the legal landscape entirely. This was no longer a simple, albeit high-stakes divorce. This was corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The ironclad prenup with its cruel infidelity clause had a fatal flaw. It was predicated on a legitimate marriage. Evelyn Reed argued that the entire marriage was fraudulent, a cover for Damien's criminal enterprise with his partner Genevieve. The prenup could be nullified. While Evelyn prepared her legal bombshells, Costello kept digging into Genevieve's past, convinced there was more to the story. Why would a man like Damien, who already had everything, risk it all? Greed was one thing, but this felt personal. Costello pulled old immigration records, school yearbooks, and birth certificates from France, cross-referencing them with the sparse details he had. He found it in a dusty, digitized archive of a small-town newspaper from outside Lyon, France. An old article from 25 years ago about a local tragedy. A promising boutique investment firm, Dubois Capital, had gone bankrupt after a hostile takeover by a ruthless American conglomerate, Blackwood Industries, led by a young, aggressive Alistair Blackwood, Damien's father. The founder of the French firm, a man named Luc Dubois, had lost everything. His reputation was ruined, his family destitute. A few months later, he took his own life. He left behind a wife and a 15-year-old daughter. The daughter's name was not Genevieve. It was Juliette. Juliette Dubois. Costello found a grainy class photo from that year. A serious-looking teenage girl with dark hair and piercing, intelligent eyes stared back at him. He ran facial recognition software comparing it to modern photos of Genevieve Dubois. It was a 98% match. Genevieve Dubois was Juliette Dubois. The entire affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. It wasn't about love or even simple greed. It was a long, patient, brilliantly executed revenge plot. Juliette now, Genevieve had spent decades crafting a new identity, working her way into the circles of power, all with one goal: to get close to the son of the man who had destroyed her father, and to dismantle the Blackwood empire from the inside out, just as Alistair Blackwood had done to her family. Damien wasn't her partner, he was her pawn, a vain, arrogant, and easily manipulated tool for her vengeance. My God, Nate breathed when Costello laid out the timeline. She's been playing him the entire time. Looks like it, kid, Costello grunted. She found his weakness, his ego, and his wallet, and she exploited it masterfully. He probably thinks this whole thing was his idea. The information was dynamite. They now understood the motive. They had the proof of the fraud, and they had the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. Evelyn Reed advised them to hold the information about Genevieve's true identity. It was their trump card to be played when it would cause the most damage. The stage was being set for a confrontation. Damien, recalled by his mother, was on a flight back to New York, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. He was walking back into what he believed was a messy domestic situation he could control with money and intimidation. He had no idea he was walking into a trap, one set not only by his vengeful lover, but also by the wife he had so carelessly discarded. Damien Blackwood stepped off his private jet at Teterboro looking more annoyed than remorseful. He wore a tailored suit, his face set in a mask of grim impatience. The St. Bart's tan was a stark, almost insulting contrast to the gray New York sky. His mother Victoria was waiting for him on the tarmac, her face a thundercloud. "What in God's name were you thinking, Damien?" she hissed, foregoing any greeting. "The entire board is in a panic, and your wife—" "I'll handle Rosalind," he cut in, his voice sharp with arrogance. "A bigger check, a new piece of jewelry. She's emotional. It will pass. Now what's the damage with the press?" His complete lack of concern for his wife or son was chillingly clear. For Damien, this was a problem of logistics and public relations, not a human crisis. Victoria filled him in on the situation as their car sped toward Manhattan, briefing him on the official story they were to present. He barely listened. He'd handled bigger problems than this. His first stop was the hospital. He planned to make a brief perfunctory appearance, show his face, and then get to the real work of damage control at his office. He strode into the private wing, projecting an aura of authority, expecting to find a tearful, broken wife he could easily placate. He found something else entirely. Rosalind was waiting for him, not in her hospital bed, but sitting in a chair. She was dressed in simple but elegant clothes. She was pale and thinner, but her eyes held a strength he had never seen before. Beside her stood Nate, his arms crossed, his expression one of pure contempt. "Rosalind, my love." Damien began, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity that had always worked before. "I came as soon as I heard. I was in a complete dead zone. I had no idea." "Save it, Damien," Rosalind said, her voice calm and clear. It didn't waver. "Save the lies for the press. I'm not interested." Damien was taken aback. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. "Darling, you're not well. You've been through a trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have never thought more clearly in my entire life. I had a lot of time to think while you were enjoying the sunshine in St. Bart's." The name hung in the air between them. Damien's face tightened. "Nate has been filling your head with poison. This is a misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you kissed her on the beach?" Rosalind asked, her voice still unnervingly steady. Or when you transferred $12 million to a shell company called Aegean Holdings last month, a company registered to one Genevieve Dubois. The blood drained from Damien's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. He looked from Rosalind to Nate, his mind racing. How could they possibly know that? What? What are you talking about? He stammered. I'm talking about fraud, Damien. Rosalind continued, pressing her advantage. I'm talking about you and your partner systematically embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from Blackwood Industries, from your own family. At that moment the door opened and Victoria Blackwood swept in, having heard the raised voices from the hall. She saw the look on her son's face and the cold fury on Rosalind's, and she knew she had lost control of the situation. Rosalind, this is not the time or the place, Victoria said, her voice like ice. You are hysterical. Don't you dare call me hysterical, Rosalind snapped, finally rising to her feet. The full force of her anger, controlled until now, was unleashed. Your son, the man I married, left me to nearly die while he conspired with his mistress to steal from you. And you knew. You knew about the affair, and you did nothing but worry about the family's reputation. You ungrateful little... Victoria began, but Nate stepped forward. Say one more word to my sister and you'll be dealing with me, he said, his voice a low growl. Damien, cornered and desperate, turned on Rosalind. You'll regret this. You signed the prenup. You try to expose me, you'll walk away with nothing. You'll never see a dime. The prenup? Rosalind gave a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. My lawyer seems to think that a contract predicated on a fraudulent marriage isn't worth the paper it's written on, especially when one of the signatories was actively engaged in a criminal conspiracy throughout the duration of the marriage. That's a game for the courts to decide, Damien. And I have a feeling the federal prosecutors will be very interested in my story. The threat of federal involvement of the entire Blackwood Empire being put under a federal microscope finally hit Victoria. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a potential cataclysm. But Nate held the final devastating card. You're a fool, Damien, Nate said, stepping forward. You think you've been in control of this? You think she's in love with you. You don't know anything, Damien snarled. I know that your brilliant, beautiful partner, Genevieve Dubois, isn't who you think she is, Nate said, watching Damien's face intently. You see, her real name is Juliette Dubois. Damien just stared, confused. The name meant nothing to him, but it meant everything to Victoria. Her face went ashen. She visibly staggered back a step, one hand flying to her throat. She remembered the name. She remembered the hostile takeover. She remembered the ruined man, Alistair's vanquished foe from decades ago. Her father was Luc Dubois, Nate continued, his voice hammering home the final nails in the coffin. Does that name ring a bell, Victoria? The man your husband Alistair crushed on his way to the top. The man who killed himself after Blackwood Industries destroyed his life. This was never about you, Damien. You were just the tool. This was about revenge. She played you from the very beginning. She used your greed and your ego to get close enough to burn your father's empire to the ground. And you handed her the matches. The truth crashed down on Damien with the force of a physical blow. The stolen moments, the whispered plans, the shared secrets, it was all a lie. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the mark. The perfect, arrogant fool. He looked at his mother, whose horrified expression confirmed everything. He looked at Rosalind, his discarded wife, who now stood before him as his executioner. In that sterile hospital corridor, the Blackwood dynasty, built on decades of ruthless ambition, finally came crashing down. Not from a rival corporation or a market crash, but from the inside, brought down by the ghosts of its past and the woman it had so grievously underestimated. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The story, leaked not by Rosalind, but by a disgruntled Blackwood Industries board member trying to save his own skin, exploded across the media. It was a scandal of epic proportions, embezzlement, a long con revenge plot, a high society affair, and a critically ill wife and newborn at its center. The headlines were brutal. Blackwood Empire rocked by fraud and betrayal. The Heiress's Revenge. How Juliette Dubois toppled a dynasty. The SEC and the FBI descended on Blackwood Industries, freezing assets and seizing records. Damien Blackwood was arrested in his penthouse, the photographer's flashbulbs a merciless storm. The image of him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation, became iconic. Victoria Blackwood, stripped of her power and influence, became a recluse. The Wall Street queen was forced to watch as her husband's legacy and her son's future were dismantled piece by federal investigators. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with scandal and crime. Genevieve Dubois, or Juliette, vanished. She had played her part perfectly. While authorities managed to claw back a significant portion of the embezzled funds from the more easily traced accounts, it was discovered that tens of millions had been moved through a labyrinth of cryptocurrency and anonymous international transfers. She had secured her victory and disappeared like a phantom, her father's ghost finally avenged. But for Rosalind, the fall of the House of Blackwood was just noise in the background. Her world was quiet, focused and centered around a single tiny heartbeat. Her son Arthur, after weeks of touch-and-go struggle in the NICU, was finally getting stronger. The day she was able to hold him for the first time without the barrier of an incubator cradling his small, warm body against her chest was her true victory. In that moment, the pain of Damien's betrayal and the stress of the legal battle faded into insignificance. This was all that mattered. With the prenup invalidated by the overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud, Evelyn Reed negotiated a substantial settlement for Rosalind from the frozen, untainted Blackwood assets. It wasn't the fortune Damien controlled, but it was more than enough to ensure that she and Arthur would be secure for the rest of their lives. It was just as clean and simple. She didn't stay in New York. The city was too full of ghosts and painful memories. With Nate's help, she bought a beautiful sunlit house on the coast of California, far from the shadows of Park Avenue. It was a home filled not with marble and chandeliers, but with light, warmth, and the sound of the ocean. Her life was no longer defined by a powerful man or a famous name. It was defined by her own strength, her resilience, and her immeasurable love for her son. She started painting again, her art historian background, finding a new outlet. Her canvases were bold and vibrant, full of life and color. One afternoon, as Arthur, now a healthy, giggling 1-year-old, crawled across a blanket in their sun-drenched living room, Nate watched his sister. The pale, fragile woman from the hospital was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. "Are you happy, Rosie?" he asked softly. Rosalind looked at her son, then out at the sparkling blue Pacific Ocean. A genuine, peaceful smile graced her lips. "I'm free," she said. "And for the first time in a very long time, that's more than enough." She had lost a fairy tale, but she had found herself. And in the quiet, steady rhythm of her new life, she was finally building a future that was truly her own, one masterpiece at a time. Rosalind's story is a harrowing reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest secrets. It's a tale of devastating betrayal, but more importantly, it's a testament to the incredible power of a mother's will and the resilience of the human spirit. She was pushed to the absolute brink, only to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. Her journey from a billionaire's wife to a self-made survivor is an inspiration to anyone who has ever had to rebuild their life from the ashes. What did you think of Rosalind's incredible fight for justice? Let us know in the comments below.
Millionaire takes Mistress to wife's birthday party, but his pregnant wife makes a life-changing decision. A polished limousine idles outside the grand gates of the Harrington estate in Manhattan, its engine humming like an anxious heartbeat. On this crisp spring evening, a glamorous party unfolds inside, meant to celebrate the wife of multi-billionaire Alexander Harrington. Yet, as guests sip vintage champagne and gossip about the latest tabloids, a scandalous sight turns every head. The billionaire arrives not with his wife on his arm, but with a stunning young woman few recognize. Whispers ripple through the crowd, for Alexander's pregnant wife is still inside, oblivious to the social earthquake about to strike on her very own birthday. Alexander Harrington was no stranger to scandal. A charismatic entrepreneur known for his sweeping business conquests, he had always carried with him an air of insatiable ambition. The Harrington name was woven into the fabric of New York's high society. His philanthropic galas attracted major figures like Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, and even foreign dignitaries. He lived in a sprawling estate overlooking Central Park, a testament to his unimaginable wealth. For years, the public had lauded him for his confidence, generosity, and devilish smile. In private, however, there were darker rumors swirling, stories of backroom deals, hush money, and quiet heartbreaks. On the surface, Alexander's marriage to Clarissa Taylor Harrington was a picture of perfection. Clarissa, an Oxford-educated art historian, came from old money herself. Her father had bankrolled the expansions of major art museums across Europe. Photographs in the tabloids and glossy magazines featured Clarissa's radiant smile and Alexander's unwavering arm around her shoulders. They were the golden couple who seemed to have it all: the looks, the lineage, the wealth. They graced the covers of lifestyle publications, donating substantial sums to children's hospitals and educational initiatives. Clarissa often accompanied Alexander to high-stakes business meetings, proving herself as a formidable negotiator. Anyone who saw them in those early days believed they were unstoppable together. Yet success came with a cost. Before long, Alexander began to distance himself from Clarissa. He poured himself into building Harrington Global, a conglomerate that spanned tech investments, real estate, and environmental solutions. Late nights in the office, trips overseas to broker major deals, and social events that Clarissa wasn't invited to became routine. Despite her growing suspicions, Clarissa tried to remain supportive, especially when she discovered she was pregnant. She planned to surprise Alexander with the news at her upcoming birthday party, a lavish gathering where she hoped they could reconnect in front of their closest friends and family. As the big night approached, the house buzzed with preparations. Lavish flower arrangements arrived in waves, filling the mansion with the scent of white orchids and subtle honeysuckle. Crystal chandeliers were polished to a sparkling sheen. The catering team meticulously planned a 12-course meal featuring delicacies flown in from around the world. Clarissa's father, Winston Taylor, personally ensured that the guest list was curated with dignitaries, celebrities, and old family friends. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Alexander was finishing up a secret dinner at an exclusive Michelin star restaurant with a woman named Sophia de la Cruz. Sophia had entered his life barely a year ago as a marketing consultant. Young, ambitious, and undeniably captivating, she had quickly become more than just a professional acquaintance. Alexander found himself enthralled by her energy and fresh perspective. Their bond deepened behind closed doors, away from the paparazzi's watchful eyes. Like a siren's call, Sophia offered the excitement that Alexander felt he was missing. She encouraged his most extravagant desires and made him feel invincible. That night, while Clarissa went over last-minute arrangements for her birthday party, Alexander decided to invite Sophia. It was a decision born of arrogance, fueled by the high that came from believing he could control any situation. How could there be any repercussions, he reasoned. He was Alexander Harrington, after all, a man who shaped the narrative. He believed the world danced to his tune. Little did he know, the stage was set for a betrayal that would change everything. Clarissa's birthday party shimmered with the promise of a memorable evening. The estate's grand ballroom was alight with crystal chandeliers, their reflections dancing across the polished marble floors. Velvet draped tables were topped with elegant centerpieces of orchids, peonies, and flickering gold candles. A string quartet performed in a corner, their music weaving seamlessly through the chatter of Manhattan's elite. Clarissa, dressed in a flowing silk gown that draped delicately over her growing bump, greeted each guest with warmth. Though her pregnancy was a secret to most, the subtle curvature of her abdomen gave hints of the new life stirring within her. She planned to share the joyful announcement. That night, her father was to toast her birthday. Then she would offer the news, hoping to see the stunned but happy expression on Alexander's face. Among the attendees were several notable figures. Her father, Winston, who stood proud in a tailored navy suit, fashion icon Isabella Quinn, who had designed Clarissa's gown, real estate mogul Kenton Cross, and even the mayor of New York City, who had come to pay tribute to the Harringtons. Conversations swirled around potential deals, philanthropic endeavors, and the latest headlines. Yet, a peculiar restlessness hung in the air. It was as if the entire estate sensed an unspoken tension. About an hour into the festivities, a hush began to spread from the entrance. People craned their necks toward the foyer where Alexander had just arrived. He stood tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, his hair slicked back in a manner reminiscent of old Hollywood stars. But it wasn't Alexander's arrival that captured everyone's shock. It was the presence of the woman on his arm, Sophia de la Cruz, in a figure-hugging red gown that shimmered with sequins, walked with the confidence of someone who had already conquered the room. Heads turned as she stepped forward, her lips curved in a self-assured smirk. She seemed well aware of the spotlight that fell upon her. Though many recognized her from social media posts and marketing conferences, they struggled to comprehend why she was here at Clarissa's birthday celebration, especially in such an intimate capacity. Confusion and whispers rippled among the guests. Some glanced toward Clarissa, who, from across the room, locked eyes with her husband. Her smile faltered, her breath caught in her throat. She froze momentarily, gripping the stem of her champagne flute so tightly that it nearly shattered. The unthinkable had happened. Alexander had not only chosen to bring Sophia to the party, he had done so brazenly, in full public view. Clarissa felt her cheeks flush with a blend of rage and humiliation. This was supposed to be her special night, and she had spent weeks meticulously organizing every detail. The sting was unbearable. Before she could fully process her shock, Winston hurried to her side, quietly asking what was going on. She shook her head, unable to offer an answer. Alexander attempted to mask any awkwardness with a broad, confident grin. He guided Sophia deeper into the ballroom as though nothing was amiss. Some guests, loyal to Clarissa, turned away in disgust or disapproval. Others, ever the opportunists, flocked to greet the new arrival, eager to glean inside information. Moments later, a hush once again fell over the crowd as Alexander approached Clarissa. They stood face to face. Sophia hovered just behind him like a sinister shadow. "Happy birthday, darling," Alexander said, leaning in to place a perfunctory kiss on Clarissa's cheek. His words felt as cold as the tension they generated. The air crackled. An uncertain hush befell the entire ballroom. Clarissa's emotions collided, anger, hurt, and betrayal swirling into a perfect storm. She felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to allow them to fall. Not here, not surrounded by these people. Summoning the composure that had been drilled into her since birth, she merely nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice tight. Alexander stepped aside, and Sophia stepped forward, offering a polite, "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Clarissa. I've heard so much about you." Clarissa could barely bring herself to respond. Likewise, she managed, a single word laced with tension. Though outwardly the exchange appeared cordial, everyone in proximity sensed the electric undertones. Clarissa's father, feeling his daughter's silent plea, quickly took the microphone to begin the evening's formal toasts. The dinner was about to begin, and beneath the veneer of elegant conversation, and polished smiles, a storm of betrayal brewed. The banquet hall glowed under candlelight, each course served by a fleet of uniformed waitstaff moving with practiced precision. Crystal glasses tinkled softly as servers poured top-shelf wine. Guests engaged in polite chit-chat at the round tables, though their eyes often wandered back to the triangle forming among Clarissa, Alexander, and Sophia. Clarissa sat at the head table, flanked by Winston on one side and Alexander on the other. Sophia was positioned uncomfortably close, just a seat away from Alexander. The arrangement had been made long before the identity of Alexander's guest had been revealed. Clarissa's mother had assumed Alexander would bring a business associate or perhaps a friend, never suspecting the truth. Tension hung thick in the air. Clarissa struggled to keep her posture upright, silently pleading for the night to pass quickly. She could feel the soft flutter of her baby within her, a gentle reminder of the delicate life she was fighting to protect. She forced a smile every time a guest raised a toast to her. Inside, however, her thoughts raced. Why did Alexander do this? How could he be so cruel? Halfway through dinner, Winston rose from his seat to give a formal birthday speech for his daughter. By then, a hush fell over the chatter as everyone turned their attention to the proud father. I have watched my daughter grow from a curious, determined child into a beautiful, accomplished woman, Winston began, his voice filled with affection. She has brought light into this family with her passion for art, her compassionate heart, and her unwavering loyalty. Tonight, I want to raise a toast to Clarissa, who has never ceased to amaze me. Happy birthday, my dear. Applause reverberated around the room, but Clarissa found herself trembling. She had planned to make her big announcement during the speech's aftermath, but the presence of Sophia made her question everything. Should she still reveal her pregnancy now? Should she keep it secret a while longer? Her internal debate was cut short when Winston nodded for Clarissa to stand. Summoning her courage, she placed a hand over her tummy, the other gripping her champagne flute. A trembling breath escaped her lips. Thank you, Father, and thank you all for being here tonight. 1. I have a little surprise to share with everyone. She paused, scanning the room. Her gaze landed on Alexander, whose expression was unreadable. Sophia was watching intently, almost hungrily, like a spectator waiting for the next act of a play. Clarissa mustered her composure and announced, I'm expecting a baby. Alexander and I are going to have our first child. A collective gasp filled the air, followed by applause from well-wishers. Many guests, unaware of the undercurrents, rose to congratulate her. Winston embraced his daughter, tears glistening in his proud eyes. Alexander, for his part, feigned a smile. He leaned over to Clarissa and brushed a quick kiss on her cheek, whispering, You might have told me sooner. It was a cutting remark, delivered in the presence of dozens of curious onlookers. Clarissa's heart clenched. She had expected a look of joy, or at least a flicker of genuine excitement, but all she found was mild annoyance. Even so, she endured the subsequent flood of well-wishers, politely accepting their hugs and handshakes. Meanwhile, she caught glimpses of Sophia's face, which remained surprisingly composed. There was no overt jealousy or shock, just an eerie calm that sent chills down Clarissa's spine. When dessert was served, a decadent 3-tier chocolate confection, the festive atmosphere had dimmed. Clarissa attempted to maintain conversations with guests, but found her mind drifting. She watched Alexander and Sophia from the corner of her eye, noticing how often he leaned toward her, whispering in her ear, and how she laughed quietly in return. It felt as though Clarissa had been cast as a minor character in her own celebration. The humiliation was impossible to ignore, yet beneath her hurt lay an unexpected ripple of resolve. This is my child, and I will not let Alexander's reckless behavior overshadow that. She pressed a hand against her still-growing belly. One thing was becoming clear: her future and her babies could no longer rest solely in Alexander's hands. After dinner, guests mingled in the expansive lounge area, sipping espresso and enjoying after-dinner liqueurs. A jazz ensemble took the stage, their smooth melodies drifting through the corridors. Several high-profile attendees began to make discreet exits, though many lingered, perhaps hoping to witness whatever spectacle might unfold. Clarissa stood near the grand fireplace, its crackling flames offering fleeting warmth in a room that felt increasingly cold. She was trying to console herself with small talk alongside her longtime friend, Isabella Quinn. Isabella, a notable fashion designer, had been privy to Clarissa's suspicions for months. She knew how desperately Clarissa had clung to the hope of restoring her marriage. Now, the sight of Sophia's brazen presence threatened to shatter Clarissa's composure. "How are you holding up?" Isabella asked softly, her eyes flicking to Alexander across the room. Clarissa swallowed hard. "I'm not sure. I feel humiliated, but also strangely liberated." Isabella nodded. "He's really crossed a line. You deserve better." Before Clarissa could reply, Alexander approached them, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Darling," he said, placing a cursory hand on Clarissa's shoulder, "I'm going to step outside to talk business for a moment. Kenton Cross wants to discuss a venture." Clarissa eyed him warily. "Are you sure it's just business?" Alexander scowled. "Don't start, Clarissa. Not now." He turned on his heel, leaving Clarissa with Isabella, her question unanswered. Clarissa felt a surge of anger at his dismissiveness. In front of dozens of guests and the press, he had effectively shoved aside her feelings on her own birthday. Minutes later, Clarissa noticed Sophia slip through a side door that led toward the garden terrace. Curiosity and a growing sense of indignation fueled her to follow. She excused herself from Isabella and made her way through the throng of guests, slipping out into the cool night air. The garden was beautifully landscaped, accented by floodlights illuminating carefully trimmed hedges. Statues of Greek deities stood silent guard amidst the greenery. Clarissa found Sophia near a stone bench, scrolling through her phone with a smug grin. "So," Clarissa began, her voice barely above a whisper, "you decided to come to my birthday party on the arm of my husband. Bold choice." Sophia glanced up. Instead of surprise or guilt, she merely offered a pitying smile. "Alexander insisted I come. He said it was important for us to be seen together." Clarissa felt the urge to snap back, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Tell me, does it bother you at all that he's married and expecting a child?" Sophia tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I'm sorry if this hurts you, but Alexander and I, we have something real. He made it clear your relationship was falling apart. I never thought you'd be pregnant." Clarissa's pulse pounded in her ears. She wondered how long Alexander had carried on these lies, painting her as some distant, loveless wife. Every syllable from Sophia's mouth fed Clarissa's fury. "Did he tell you that I was distant because he was never home?" Clarissa fired back, her voice shaking. "That I stopped trusting him because he kept secrets? You may think you have something real, but let me tell you, Alexander's version of truth is as malleable as clay." Sophia's expression hardened. "He's different with me. I'm not here to fight you, Clarissa. I just came because he asked me to." A sudden wave of nausea swelled within Clarissa, anger and heartbreak roiling together. She pressed a hand over her belly, inhaling slowly to calm herself. The last thing she wanted was to faint or cause a scene that might harm her baby. "No, you're not here to fight," Clarissa said. "But you're playing a dangerous game. Remember, the man who cheats with you can cheat on you just as easily." Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but the tension was shattered by the sound of footsteps. They both turned to see Winston stepping into the garden, worry etched across his features. "Clarissa, are you all right?" Clarissa straightened her posture. I'm fine, Father. The older man looked between Clarissa and Sophia, quickly piecing together the confrontation in progress. Though he kept his tone neutral, there was a coldness in Winston's eyes as he addressed Sophia. Miss Dela Cruz, if you'll excuse us, I'd like a moment alone with my daughter. Sophia hesitated, then gracefully slid past them and back into the mansion. Once she was gone, Winston took Clarissa's hand. "This is unacceptable," he murmured. "I won't stand by and watch my daughter be humiliated." Clarissa exhaled, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. "I know, but I need time to think, Father. I have to decide what's best for me and the baby." Winston pulled her into a gentle embrace, the garden's stillness enveloping them. "I'll support whatever decision you make." And as the moonlight bathed them in its glow, Clarissa realized she was at a crossroads. One path led back inside to Alexander, to their marriage, to the heartbreak. The other path remained uncertain, but it offered a hope for dignity and independence that she had nearly forgotten was possible. Long after most guests had gone home, the Harrington estate finally settled into an uneasy silence. The staff busied themselves cleaning up the remnants of the lavish party, collecting empty champagne flutes and disposing of flower arrangements that had begun to wilt under the harsh light. Clarissa retreated to her bedroom suite, feeling a lifetime older than she had at the start of the night. She slipped off her silk gown, gazing at her reflection in the mirror. The curve of her stomach was more noticeable now that she no longer wore a loose dress. She ran her hand across her abdomen, feeling the comforting presence of her unborn child. "Is this how I want to raise you?" she thought, "in a household where your father disrespects me so openly?" Down the hall, the door to Alexander's study was slightly ajar. Light spilled into the corridor, accompanied by the faint aroma of whiskey. Clarissa took a deep breath and walked toward it, determined to confront him, but also to keep her emotions in check. She found Alexander behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at his computer screen. He looked up when she entered. "Clarissa," he greeted, though his voice lacked warmth. She closed the door quietly behind her. "What you did tonight was humiliating," she began, her voice a subdued tremor. "On my birthday, of all days, you bring her here?" Alexander rubbed his temples, exhaling. "Look, I'm sorry it had to happen this way. But you've known our relationship has been strained for a long time. Sophia is part of my life now." Clarissa bristled. "And I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." A flicker of guilt flickered in his eyes, then vanished. "I know that," he said tersely, "but you've made no attempt to support me in my ventures. You constantly criticize my absences, my business expansions, my choices." Clarissa stared at him in disbelief. "Because you constantly push me away. Every time I try to meet you halfway, you vanish on another business trip or stay out late with no explanation. Do you even hear yourself?" He rose from his chair, circling the desk to stand before her. She realized how tired he looked, shadows beneath his eyes betraying a man under pressure. Yet sympathy was hard to muster when she remembered Sophia's smug presence. "I'm under tremendous stress," Alexander said, pacing the length of the room. "We're finalizing an international deal with the Saudis. I have a board meeting next week that could make or break the new technology division. And now we have a baby on the way, something you didn't even tell me until you announced it to everyone tonight." Clarissa's anger flared again. "I planned to tell you privately, but you've been avoiding me for weeks. We barely share a meal, let alone a meaningful conversation." Alexander rested his hands on the back of an ornate chair, letting out a long breath. "I can't do this right now." She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "If you won't choose to be a husband and father, then I'll make a choice for myself and this child." Her words hung in the air like a distant thunderclap. Alexander frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Clarissa said, her voice firmer now, "I'm considering leaving. I can't endure this spectacle. Not for me." and not for our baby." Alexander's face paled, though she couldn't tell if it was from fear or anger. He opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. In the silence that followed, Clarissa realized she had made her decision. She would not allow herself to be paraded around like a trophy wife while he flaunted his affair in her face. Without waiting for his reply, she turned on her heel and left the study. Her steps echoed in the corridor, each one a resolute stride toward whatever future she would create away from this toxic environment. In her bedroom, Clarissa shut the door and rested her back against it. She felt a swirl of emotions: sadness, anger, fear, but also an unexpected sense of freedom. She was done pretending everything was fine, done playing the role of the compliant wife while her husband publicly undermined her. Tomorrow, the press would likely run scandalous headlines. Social media might explode with speculation, but tonight, as she placed a protective hand over her unborn child, Clarissa felt a calm resolve. She would not be defined by Alexander's betrayal. She would forge her own path, even if she had to go through heartbreak to find it. The next morning arrived with a clamor of news vans outside the estate's gates. Word had leaked from the party, perhaps from a staff member or an opportunistic guest, about the shocking drama. A billionaire husband bringing his mistress to his pregnant wife's birthday celebration. Journalists scrambled to piece together the story, hungry for exclusive interviews or even a single photograph that captured the tension. Clarissa awoke to the sounds of muffled shouting below her window. She peered through the curtains and saw a small crowd of reporters, cameras at the ready. Her heart sank at the spectacle. She had grown up under the public's gaze, but never had she felt so exposed, so vulnerable. She prepared herself for the day with steady determination. Slipping into a comfortable yet elegant maternity dress, she summoned the household staff and informed them. She would handle any necessary statements herself. She then called her personal lawyer, Margaret Lee, a formidable mind in family law. "Margaret," Clarissa said when the call connected, "I need your advice. Things have gotten complicated. Alexander has openly brought another woman into our marriage, and I need to protect myself and my baby." Margaret's calm voice offered reassurance. "We can discuss your options: prenups, child custody, financial support, property division. The media storm will be intense, but we can manage it. Do you want me to come over?" "Yes, please." Clarissa exhaled. "I'd like to figure out the best course of action sooner rather than later." Alexander, meanwhile, had already left the estate for his office, avoiding the reporters gathered outside. Clarissa suspected he'd do damage control from behind a conference table, likely spinning a narrative that made him appear the victim of marital discord. His statement would undoubtedly gloss over his blatant betrayal, focusing instead on their incompatibilities. Clarissa was determined not to be caught off guard by his rhetoric. By mid-morning, Margaret Lee arrived, carefully navigating her way through the reporters. She was a short, impeccably dressed woman who exuded both warmth and steely resolve. They sat together in the sunlit parlor, far from prying ears. "Clarissa, the first question is, do you intend to remain married?" Margaret asked, pulling out a notepad. Clarissa took a long moment to consider. Memories flashed through her mind: her wedding day, the joy they once shared, the nights spent discussing dreams for the future, and the gradual drift into secrecy and lies. Finally, she shook her head. "I can't see a way forward with Alexander. He's made it clear he's invested in someone else. I won't subject myself or my child to that kind of instability." Margaret nodded, jotting notes. "Understood. In that case, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery and mental cruelty. Your prenuptial agreement does entitle you to significant assets, but we need to ensure Alexander can't manipulate his financials." Clarissa's hand rested protectively over her abdomen. "And the baby?" I want to make sure custody is clarified. Margaret's lips curved into a sympathetic smile. We'll arrange for shared custody, though you can request primary custody if you can prove it's in the child's best interest. Given Alexander's public behavior, it shouldn't be too difficult. They spent the next hour outlining a plan, reviewing documents, and strategizing how to handle the inevitable media onslaught. Winston joined them midway, offering both emotional support and financial resources. Clarissa felt a surge of gratitude for her father's unwavering presence. Despite everything, she was not alone. As Margaret departed, Clarissa steeled herself to face the reporters outside. She stepped out onto the front steps of the estate, her father by her side. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Microphones jostled for position as frenzied voices called out her name. Clarissa raised a hand for silence. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice shaking slightly before she steadied it. "I would prefer privacy during this difficult time. However, I understand there are questions. All I can say is that Alexander Harrington and I are dealing with personal matters, and my primary concern is the well-being of my unborn child." "Are you divorcing Mr. Harrington?" a reporter shouted. Clarissa paused, meeting the cacophony of eyes and lenses head-on. "I'm consulting with my legal counsel regarding all available options. That's all I can share for now." She turned to leave, ignoring the avalanche of follow-up questions. Though her heart pounded, she felt a newfound sense of courage. This was the beginning of her own narrative, one where she would no longer be overshadowed by Alexander's towering presence. Inside the estate, a staff member closed the doors behind her. Clarissa's resolve crystallized. She would stand firm, not just for herself, but for the little life growing within her. The drama had only begun, but Clarissa was ready to fight for her future. Across town, in the Harrington Global headquarters, Alexander paced his corner office, phone pressed to his ear. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline, but his attention was laser-focused on the crisis at hand. "You promised me this merger would go smoothly," he barked into the phone. "Now the board is panicking because of the media circus around my personal life. I need a statement from PR immediately." On the other end of the line was Harrington Global's chief communications officer, a man named Bradley Swain. He attempted to maintain professionalism despite Alexander's aggressive tone. "We have a draft statement ready to go. However, I strongly advise a unified approach with your spouse. The tabloids are having a field day with the rumors." Alexander exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Clarissa's not cooperating. She's consulting her own lawyers and refusing to speak with me." Bradley's hesitation was evident. "With all due respect, if you and Mrs. Harrington appear combative, it could harm the company's public image even more. The board wants stability." Alexander slammed a fist onto his desk. "If the board is so concerned, they can remember how much Harrington Global owes to my leadership. Get the statement ready." He hung up abruptly and sank into his leather chair. His reflection in the polished surface of the desk stared back at him, a man who prided himself on control, now embroiled in a scandal that was spiraling out of his hands. His phone buzzed with incoming texts, presumably from Sophia and from other acquaintances wanting clarity or, worse, gossip. Just then, Kenton Cross knocked on the open door. A long-time associate in real estate, Kenton had been invited to the birthday party fiasco and had witnessed the meltdown firsthand. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You've really stirred the pot this time, Alexander," Kenton remarked, seating himself across from the desk. "The business community is whispering about whether you can handle your personal life, let alone these billion-dollar deals." Alexander bristled. "I know how to manage my personal affairs. The tabloids will move on once something else catches their attention." Kenton folded his arms, eyeing Alexander critically. "And your wife?" She looked serious about taking the baby and walking away. You stand to lose a lot if you don't handle this diplomatically. Alexander's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? I've been poring over the prenup. My lawyers assure me we have options. Kenton shook his head. But is a nasty legal battle worth it? The public loves Clarissa. She's philanthropic, well-spoken, practically royalty in certain circles. If she plays the sympathy card, you'll be painted as the callous husband who flaunted his mistress. You might win the merger, but you'll lose the court of public opinion, and that can hurt your bottom line in the long run. Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose again, feeling a headache bloom behind his eyes. So what do you suggest? Speak to her, Kenton replied evenly. Come to an arrangement. Maybe it's time you realize that salvaging your reputation is more critical than stroking your ego. Alexander glared at him, but said nothing. Deep down, he knew Kenton was right. His entire empire was built on public trust, stakeholder confidence, and the allure of success. The scandal was tarnishing that aura. Stocks had already dipped slightly, and rumors swirled of potential investors pulling out. After Kenton left, Alexander's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sophia. He stared at the screen, weighing whether to answer. Finally, he picked up. What do you need? He asked curtly. Sophia's voice was soft. I'm worried about you. The media is hounding me too. People are calling me a home wrecker, saying all sorts of things online. He sighed heavily. It'll blow over. Don't respond to them. There was a brief pause. And us? Where do we stand if Clarissa files for divorce? Alexander's mind reeled. He pictured his future, either losing massive chunks of his estate in a bitter divorce or fighting Clarissa in court. Neither option seemed appealing. I don't know, he finally admitted. I need time to think. He ended the call without a proper goodbye, tossing his phone onto the desk. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain, cornered. The carefully curated life he'd built was crumbling, his company threatened by rumor, his marriage on the brink, and his mistress already demanding reassurances. The unstoppable Alexander Harrington was suddenly at a loss. Yet even in this low moment, a flicker of stubborn pride coursed through him. He hadn't fought his way to the top to be taken down by gossip and scandal. I can handle this, he told himself. I'll do whatever it takes to come out on top. Over the following week, the media frenzy grew to epic proportions. Magazine covers screamed headlines like Harrington's double life and billionaire's mistress crashes. Pregnant wife's birthday. Talk shows dissected every available crumb of information, inviting body language experts to analyze clips from the birthday party. Social media lit up with hashtags pitting hashtag Team Clarissa against hashtag Team Alexander, although the vast majority appeared to rally around Clarissa. Feeling cornered, Alexander's PR team issued a formal statement. Mr. and Miss S. Harrington are committed to resolving their private matters amicably and appreciate the public's understanding during this personal transition. The statement, however, did little to quell the speculation. Rumors surfaced that Clarissa was preparing to file for divorce citing adultery, which carried heavy implications for Alexander's standing in certain conservative business circles. Clarissa maintained a dignified silence, refusing interviews. She entrusted her father Winston to handle any urgent press inquiries, while her lawyer Margaret readied the necessary legal documents. The Harrington estate turned into a fortress, gates closed, security heightened, and staff under strict instructions to turn away all outsiders. Still, life had to continue. Clarissa, who once curated art shows, found herself diving into a new project, a children's arts charity event, something she hoped to do in honor of her baby. She threw herself into philanthropic efforts as a way to cope with her emotional turmoil. Each day brought fresh heartbreak whenever she remembered the betrayal, but she also felt a growing excitement about her future as a mother. Isabella Quinn paid frequent visits, offering both creative input on the charity event and emotional support. Together, they scouted venues, reached out to sponsors, and began planning a gala that would bring attention to arts programs for underprivileged youth. Clarissa found a renewed sense of purpose in this project. She might have lost faith in her marriage, but she still believed in making the world a better place. Meanwhile, Alexander fought on the business front. The prospective merger he'd been touting was now at risk. Foreign investors hesitated to link their brand with a man drowning in scandal. Even so, he soldiered on with negotiations, offering sweetened terms and personal guarantees. He also hired a high-powered legal team to mount a defense in the likely divorce proceedings. His lawyers tried various tactics, sending documents that questioned Clarissa's mental state, insinuating she might be unstable due to pregnancy hormones. It was a ruthless strategy designed to protect Alexander's assets and hamper her claims in court. When Clarissa received those documents, she felt physically ill. The insinuation that she was mentally compromised due to pregnancy was more than just an insult. It was a direct threat to her credibility as a prospective mother. Margaret quickly drafted a sharp rebuttal, warning Alexander's team that any further slander would be met with defamation suits. In quieter moments, Clarissa felt the weight of it all. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night, tears silently streaming down her cheeks as she grieved the happy future she once envisioned with Alexander. But each time, she reminded herself of the new life growing inside her, the gentle flutters that reminded her she was no longer alone. That simple fact fueled her resolve. On day 8 of the media onslaught, Clarissa received a personal phone call from an unexpected ally, Catherine Lyons, a renowned talk show host with a reputation for championing women's rights. Clarissa answered hesitantly. "Clarissa," Catherine said in a soothing tone, "I'd like to invite you for an interview, no gimmicks. Just a chance for you to speak your truth, if you're ready." Clarissa hesitated. Part of her wanted to remain silent, to guard her privacy. But the other part, a growing part, recognized that telling her side of the story might turn the tide in her favor, and possibly set the record straight about her pregnancy, her plans, and her dignity. "I'll consider it," Clarissa answered. "Give me some time." She ended the call, realizing she stood at another crossroads. A public interview could be a powerful weapon in this media war, a chance to reveal Alexander's manipulations without stooping to his legal team's level. Yet it also meant exposing her vulnerabilities before millions of viewers. As she paced the grand foyer of the Harrington estate, Clarissa gently rested a hand on her belly. "Whatever path I choose," she whispered to her child, "I promise it'll be one that leads us to a life of love and respect." And so the battle lines were drawn. Alexander might have commanded armies of lawyers and PR experts, but Clarissa had discovered a deeper strength within herself. The stage was set for the next crucial act of their unfolding drama, the moment she would decide whether to stand in the public eye and reclaim her narrative or stay quiet and let the scandal define her. Clarissa ultimately accepted Catherine Lyons' invitation. The idea of publicly exposing her pain both terrified and intrigued her. But the potential benefits were clear. The chance to correct the rumor mill, to assert her agency, and to make known her intentions for her child's future. After consulting with Margaret and Winston, she agreed to a carefully orchestrated, sit-down interview in a private, tasteful setting, a neutral location that felt neither intrusive nor contrived. On the evening of the interview, Clarissa arrived at Catherine's production studio, which had been converted into a warm, living room-like set. Soft lighting framed 2 comfortable armchairs positioned opposite one another. A small floral arrangement and a table with glasses of water separated them. Off-camera, a minimal crew whispered final adjustments, ensuring the microphone levels were correct and the cameras were rolling smoothly. Catherine greeted Clarissa with a warm hug, whispering, "Remember, you're in control. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, just say so." Clarissa nodded. She took a steadying breath and settled into her chair, clad in a modest, elegant dress. She appeared every bit the poised socialite, except for the vulnerability in her eyes, which revealed the depth of her turmoil. Once the countdown ended, Catherine opened the interview. "Good evening. Tonight, I'm joined by Clarissa Taylor Harrington, who's found herself in the eye of a media storm involving her marriage to billionaire Alexander Harrington. Clarissa, thank you for being here." Clarissa offered a polite smile. "Thank you for having me, Catherine." Catherine leaned in with genuine concern. "You've remained largely silent since the reports emerged of Alexander's affair. Why choose to speak now?" Clarissa folded her hands in her lap, exhaling slowly. "This past week has been overwhelming. I've been hounded by paparazzi, and my family's privacy has been invaded. But I've also realized that silence allows others to control the narrative. I want people to understand that I am not just Alexander Harrington's wife. I am my own person, and I have my own story." Catherine nodded, leaning forward. "I understand you're expecting your first child with Alexander. How has that impacted your decisions?" A gentle hand drifted to Clarissa's stomach. "Enormously. Becoming a mother changed my perspective on what I'm willing to endure. I realized I can't raise my child in a home filled with deceit. That's not the environment I want for them." Catherine's gaze was sympathetic. "What do you say to those who argue that marital problems should be resolved in private?" Clarissa's voice trembled slightly. "Normally I'd agree. But when someone brings their mistress to your birthday party in front of hundreds of guests, it's no longer a private matter. It's humiliating, and it forces you to respond. And the media, well, they thrive on sensational stories." Catherine's tone turned more serious. "The rumor mill suggests you're seeking divorce. Is that true?" A flicker of emotion crossed Clarissa's face. "Yes, I'm filing for divorce. I have to protect myself and my child. Alexander's affair. It isn't the only problem we've had, but it's the final straw." The studio fell silent as the gravity of her words settled. Catherine glanced at her notes, then chose her next question carefully. "There have been allegations from Alexander's legal team that you're emotionally unstable due to your pregnancy. How do you respond?" Clarissa's eyes hardened. "I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, that's a common tactic to discredit women, especially pregnant women. I'm under a doctor's care, and I'm perfectly capable of making rational decisions. If anything, pregnancy has made me more clear about what I want in life." Catherine nodded, then leaned back with a soft smile. "What do you envision for your future and your child's?" For a moment, Clarissa's features softened. "I want a peaceful life, filled with love, where my child can grow up knowing respect and kindness. I plan to continue my philanthropic work, especially with children's art programs, and I hope that my child will one day be proud of the person I've become." The interview concluded on a reflective note, with Catherine praising Clarissa's courage. "Thank you for your honesty and vulnerability tonight. I'm sure your story will resonate with many who faced similar betrayals." Clarissa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since the scandal broke, she felt free, having shared her truth on her own terms. The cameras powered down, and Catherine stood to hug her again, whispering, "You are amazing. Stay strong." By the time Clarissa emerged from the studio, she found Winston waiting for her. He gently took her arm. "Proud of you, my girl," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Clarissa managed a weak smile. "This is the beginning, isn't it?" Winston nodded, guiding her toward the waiting car. "Yes, but at least now you're writing your own story." She climbed into the vehicle, gazing out at the city lights. Somewhere in the labyrinth of skyscrapers stood Alexander, likely watching the interview and scrambling for his next move. But for Clarissa, the course was set. No longer a silent victim, she embraced this new chapter with resolve. Whatever awaited, she wouldn't face it as the timid wife, overshadowed by her husband's arrogance. She was a mother-to-be, fighting for her child's future with every ounce of courage she had. Alexander did indeed watch the interview from his penthouse apartment. The crisp, modern furnishings offered little comfort as Clarissa's words sank in. She had confirmed the divorce publicly, exposing his affair in a calm, dignified manner that made him seem like a heartless villain. His phone vibrated incessantly with texts and calls, business partners, board members, friends, and even Sophia. He finally answered Sophia's call. "Did you watch it?" he asked, voice taut. "I did," Sophia replied. "It's not good for you, Alexander. Public sympathy is with Clarissa. Everyone's calling her a brave mother-to-be, and you're—" She trailed off, as if reluctant to finish the sentence. Alexander ground his teeth. "I'm what, Sophia?" she sighed. "You're the unfaithful billionaire. Social media is destroying you. The board might oust you if the stocks continue to dip." A hot flush of panic coursed through Alexander, though he struggled to maintain composure. "I can't be ousted from my own company. I control the majority shares." "Yes, but if confidence in you drops enough, they might find a way. You've made some enemies on the board over the years." Alexander inhaled sharply, recalling the tense board meetings where he'd forced through expansions, ignoring cautionary advice. Perhaps those resentments now had fertile ground to grow. "So you're saying I should apologize publicly? Backtrack?" Sophia hesitated. "Maybe. Or paint Clarissa as manipulative. If you let her narrative stand uncontested, you'll lose. You need to fight back." The idea churned in Alexander's gut. His pride rebelled against apologizing, but he also feared the destructive potential of Clarissa's public image. "I'll speak with my PR team," he said curtly, ending the call. Within an hour, Alexander convened an emergency meeting with Bradley Swain and a team of crisis management experts. They sat around his long glass table, laptops open, phone lines buzzing. "Mr. Harrington," Bradley began, clearing his throat, "the interview has galvanized public support for Clarissa. She's being hailed as a role model for women standing up against infidelity. We need to refocus the narrative on your business achievements, your philanthropic efforts, remind people who you are outside of this scandal." One of the crisis managers chimed in. "Alternatively, we can release a counter-statement accusing Mrs. Harrington of withholding the pregnancy from you, arguing she used it as leverage. That angle might shift some blame her way." Alexander scowled, recalling how Clarissa had tried to inform him, but was met with his own negligence. "That might be thin," he muttered, though desperation flickered in his eyes. "But we can't just let her run away with this." Bradley hesitated, then spoke softly. "Alexander, maybe you need to consider a genuine apology. Public contrition could do wonders. A show of remorse. A vow to continue supporting Clarissa and the child financially, no matter what." Alexander's pride warred with the rational part of his mind. He loathed the thought of appearing weak. Apologies were for those who admitted they were wrong, and in his eyes, Clarissa bore some responsibility for the breakdown of their marriage. But the alternative, an all-out battle, might irreparably damage his empire. "Draft a statement," he finally conceded, tension visible in his clenched jaw. "Frame it as me regretting how events unfolded, reaffirm my commitment to the child, and mention I hope Clarissa and I can come to amicable terms." Bradley nodded, relief evident on his face. "We'll have it ready by morning." As the team filed out, Alexander remained in his chair, staring at the city lights. Amicable terms, he thought, recalling the legal documents accusing Clarissa of emotional instability. Those had been his lawyer's idea, but he hadn't protested. He knew it would likely anger her further. How did it all come to this? His mind drifted to memories of Clarissa, once bright, playful, engaging. Their early dates in Paris, spontaneous trips to the Caribbean, and dinners where they'd talk late into the night about their shared dreams. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment their relationship frayed. Perhaps it had been a series of small betrayals, neglected conversations, growing distances. Now, they stood at opposite ends of a public battlefield, neither willing to yield. A heavy sigh escaped him. For the first time, a small voice inside whispered that perhaps Clarissa wasn't the only one hurting. He pictured her face during the interview, sad, determined, and undeniably pregnant with his child. But the fleeting remorse clashed with anger. Her going public felt like an ambush, leaving him cornered. He pushed down whatever empathy he'd felt and resolved to win, no matter the cost. If Clarissa wanted war, he'd fight with every tool at his disposal. Days turned into another week. Clarissa's interview aired worldwide, generating impassioned debates. Donations to her charity soared, while Alexander's once gleaming reputation took blow after blow. Stockholders of Harrington Global expressed discomfort in private meetings, and rumors persisted that the board was exploring contingencies should Alexander's public image compromise the company's stability. Clarissa remained sequestered at the estate, focusing on her health and the charity event. Despite the hailstorm of sensational headlines, she found pockets of peace reading, journaling, painting. She even began designing a nursery, selecting soft pastel hues and whimsical animal murals, determined to provide a nurturing environment for her child. Alexander, however, escalated his counteroffensive. His lawyers filed motions claiming Clarissa had deliberately withheld news of her pregnancy to manipulate him. He declined a direct interview but released a video statement where he appeared remorseful yet subtly blamed marital discord on Clarissa's lack of supportive understanding of his business pressures. The statement earned mixed reactions. Some found it sincere, others labeled it damage control. Late one afternoon, Clarissa heard the echo of raised voices downstairs. She emerged from her room to see Winston arguing with a man in a tailored suit, one of Alexander's lawyers. Margaret Lee stood close by, her expression mirroring Winston's anger. "Clarissa, they've come to serve you additional papers," Margaret explained, exasperation in her voice. "They're pushing for an urgent hearing on spousal support and property claims." Clarissa stiffened. "Is Alexander here?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington is not present. He simply sent me to deliver these documents." Clarissa accepted the paperwork, scanning the legal jargon that essentially questioned her entitlement to portions of the estate, claiming she abandoned the marriage. It also criticized her for public defamation, claiming that the interview painted Alexander in a damaging light. She felt her blood run cold. "That's enough," Winston growled, turning to the lawyer. "You can leave now. Any further communication goes through Miss Lee." The lawyer bowed stiffly and departed. Clarissa closed the door behind him, heart pounding like thunder in her chest. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "He's not letting up." Margaret placed a reassuring hand on Clarissa's shoulder. "We anticipated this. We'll fight it." Later that evening, Clarissa locked herself in her bedroom. She gazed at the city skyline outside her window, tears finally overtaking her composure. The weight of the baby in her womb felt both comforting and terrifying. Her child was counting on her to provide stability and security. Yet Alexander's relentless legal maneuvers threatened everything she was trying to build. In that moment, she made another life-changing decision. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years, an old family connection in England, who owned a country estate far from the paparazzi's reach. The phone rang and a familiar voice answered. Aunt Rosalind, Clarissa said, her voice trembling. I need a place to stay, somewhere I can clear my head. Is your guest cottage still available? Her aunt's warm reply was immediate. Of course, my dear. Come as soon as you wish. Clarissa ended the call, a surge of relief coursing through her. If Alexander wanted to wage war, fine, but she wouldn't remain a sitting target. She would remove herself from the toxic environment, cross an ocean if she had to, and focus on her child's well-being. The estate in England was secluded, nestled in lush countryside, the perfect retreat where she could gather her strength and prepare for the final battles to come. She spent the rest of the evening making arrangements, instructing Margaret on how to handle any urgent legal matters in her absence, coordinating with Winston to keep an eye on the estate, and packing essentials for the journey. A strange calm took hold of her as she placed each folded maternity garment into her suitcase. She was no longer passively reacting to Alexander's betrayals. She was charting her own course. At midnight, Clarissa stood by the nursery she'd only just begun to decorate, her heart squeezed with bittersweet emotion. We'll come back, she whispered to the unborn child. But for now, we need a safe haven. She left the nursery lights off, gently closing the door behind her. A new chapter awaited, one that would test her resilience, her capacity for healing, and her willingness to protect what truly mattered. Regardless of Alexander's tactics, Clarissa was determined that neither she nor her child would live in the shadows of his ego and deception ever again. Clarissa's departure from New York was quiet, shrouded in secrecy to avoid the press. A private car whisked her to a discreet gate at the airport, where she boarded a small jet bound for England. The aircraft hummed gently as it rose above the city lights, each twinkle below her growing distant until the skyline was nothing more than a memory. The flight offered time for reflection. In the silent cocoon of the cabin, she flipped through photographs of her and Alexander from years past. Their wedding day, two beaming faces full of hope, honeymoon snapshots in Santorini, laughter and golden sunsets, snapshots of philanthropic galas where they stood arm in arm. Each image felt like a relic from another era, proof that once they had shared something precious. Where did it all go wrong, she wondered, though the question no longer carried the same sting. She was moving forward. Answers might never come, and that was acceptable. By dawn, the plane touched down on the fog-veiled runway of a private airfield in England. Waiting for her was Aunt Rosalind, a regal woman in her 60s, with streaks of silver in her hair. She enveloped Clarissa in a warm embrace the moment they met on the tarmac. "My darling girl," she murmured, "you've been through so much." Clarissa felt tears threaten to spill. "I need some time away from all of it." Hand in hand, they climbed into a vintage Bentley that carried them through rolling hills, past grazing sheep and stone cottages. Eventually, they arrived at a sprawling countryside manor, Aunt Rosalind's ancestral home. Clarissa was shown to a quaint guest cottage with ivy climbing its walls, flower boxes brimming with lavender, and a little pond nestled behind it, surrounded by willow trees. It was a world apart from the opulence of the Harrington estate, yet just as enchanting in its own right. Over the next few days, Clarissa settled into a gentle routine, morning walks through dew-kissed fields, afternoons sipping tea with Aunt Rosalind, and evenings reading by the fire. The relentless hammering of paparazzi and the digital storm of social media felt a million miles away. She checked in with Margaret daily, learning that Alexander's legal team was livid about her disappearance, but there was little they could do. Legally, she was free to travel. Winston reported that the media had calmed somewhat, disappointed to find no further drama at the Harrington estate. One drizzly afternoon, as Clarissa lounged in a cushioned window seat, she felt a firm little kick inside her belly. She smiled, placing a hand over the spot. "You're going to be strong," she whispered. Stronger than I ever was. In that moment, she realized how much she had changed in just a matter of weeks. No longer the hesitant wife striving to keep up appearances, she felt a quiet power blooming inside her, a determination to create a life of peace and integrity for her child. Occasionally, her mind drifted to Alexander. She'd wonder if he regretted his actions, if he missed her, or if he was merely strategizing his next business move. But those thoughts no longer twisted her heart in knots. The pain had dulled into a distant ache, a sign of healing. She might have loved him once, but she loved her child more fiercely than anything else. It was that love that propelled her onward. Aunt Rosalind's estate became a sanctuary for introspection, a place where Clarissa could nurture both her pregnancy and her spirit. Each day her belly grew, and with it, her resolve solidified like the ancient stones in the manor walls. She would finalize the divorce on her own terms, ensure her child's future was secure, and continue her philanthropic passion. If Alexander wanted to remain locked in his cycle of ambition and scandal, that was his choice. Sitting by the pond one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in lilac and gold, Clarissa exhaled softly. The reflections of the willow trees rippled on the water's surface, reminding her of life's impermanence. She couldn't control what had happened, but she could shape what would come next. As twilight fell, she returned to the cottage, heart lightened, ready to face the final notes of her confrontation with Alexander whenever that day would come. For now, she found solace in the hush of the English countryside, every breath affirming her newfound independence, and the life growing inside her both delicate and immensely strong. Outside a quiet English manor, beneath a sky of lavender and gold, Clarissa has finally found a sanctuary for herself and for the child she carries. Though her journey began in heartbreak and betrayal, it transformed into a testament of courage, self-discovery, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Still, the world watches, waiting to see if Alexander Harrington will repent, retaliate, or relinquish the empire he fought so hard to build. In the meantime, Clarissa holds fast to her hopes for a future defined by love, integrity, and resilience. Will this billionaire's betrayal spark a revolution in Clarissa's life? Or will old wounds heal into a fragile truce?